My question to you is, do you ever see a day when a socially liberal wing will return to the Republican Party? And if so, when do you think that's going to happen?
I think it is beginning to happen. I think it'll continue to evolve. You saw with people like Scott Brown. I think in some ways Chris Christie comes closer to that model. And I think you will see a continuation in that direction. But I mean, clearly we're going to be, if you look out over the next 25 years, barring some really strange thing happening, we will remain the largely conservative party in America. Democrats will remain the largely liberal party in America. But I think it will be in a broader sense than you've seen recently. This is an example. This is why I'm frankly taking on the old order in my own party. It is anti-human to suggest that you can go into a community and say, I'm going to deport your grandmother, but I've got a great jobs program.
The question was that you raised at the beginning. You thought perhaps going into election day that you were going to win, and a lot of it had to do with the assumptions about the turnout. In 1992, 87% of the electorate was white.
Right.
In 2012, 72%. And so, we are becoming a much more diverse country. Isn't that a big challenge for the Republican Party to find a way to relate to this broader electorate?
Joining me today is Speaker Gingrich. Thank you very much for coming to University of Chicago.
I'm delighted to be here. It's been a great day all day long.
One issue that comes up frequently when I talk to students on campus is the lack of compromise here on Capitol Hill. What can be done to further compromise and basically pass legislation in the interest of the American people?
Well, I think they've got to learn to listen to each other. I think the president's got to listen to Republicans in Congress, and Republicans in Congress have to learn to listen to the president. And that means sitting down in the same room, having genuine conversations, and trying to develop what consultants would call appreciative understanding of why do you believe something, and why is it important to you, and then trying to find a common ground.
Many students here at the University of Chicago are immigrants. They've come here. They want to become citizens of this great country. Will we see a deal on immigration reform, and when do you think that will happen?
Well, I strongly believe that if you graduate from one of our institutions of higher education, you ought to get a green card with your graduate degree. And I think that something like that is probably going to pass. And I think, candidly, the big problem there is going to be the labor unions. It's just going to be their opposition to guest worker programs and their opposition to allowing people of talent and people of resources to become citizens.
And also another issue that's important to students here at the University of Chicago and Chicago at large is gun control. What do you think will happen for this sort of legislation? Will we get an assault weapons ban, or is that completely ruled out?
Well, remember, in Chicago, you have almost no deaths from assault weapons. The vast majority of your deaths are from pistols. And what you need to have is a focus on criminals. 80% of the killings in Chicago come from the gangs. Mm-hmm. And if we would focus, and I'm for very tough measures on criminals. If you're carrying a gun and you're a convicted felon and you're out on parole, you go back in immediately. If you have somebody else buy a gun for you, you and they go back to jail. So if you commit a crime with a gun, you go to jail with a much longer sentence. So I think there are things we can do to make the city much, much safer by focusing on criminal violence rather than harassing innocent people.
But what about those that buy guns in other states and bring them across the border? How can that be addressed?
That should be illegal. If you've bought a gun, if you're in a group that's not allowed to have guns, for example, convicted felons, people on parole, and you end up having a gun, you should, no matter where you got it from, you should automatically be found guilty and taken off the streets.
And finally, you said, I noticed on Morning Joe earlier this week, that you listed your favorite presidents, or the greatest presidents rather, and among them was FDR. And I found that very interesting because he raised income taxes on those over 90 at a 90% threshold level. So why did you pick him, or what do you admire about him?
He did that during the Second World War.
Okay.
We were fighting for our survival, and there were a lot of exemptions. People could get away with not paying it. But FDR was president for over 12 years. He carried us through the Great Depression. He carried us through World War II. In many ways, you can't imagine the level of skill and capability he brought to the office of president. He was a remarkable person.
And finally, I know you're going to be releasing a report on this past election and what the Republican Party needs to move forward. What do you think is the main overarching goal of Republicans moving forward, so they can elect and minorities once
Well,
again?
look, I think they've got to recognize that this country has changed in very significant ways, and that we have to learn to operate successfully and compete successfully in the America that exists today, not the America that existed in 1980 when we elected Ronald Reagan.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for coming to University of Chicago.
Good to be here.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.